Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Whining On. I'm Matt Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue. First thing I'd like to say is thank you, everyone, for watching so far. If you'd like to support the channel, please check out our Patreon, check out the PayPal, put in if you can, keep it working. So let's get quickly on. Today, I am very, very happy to have a good friend, Mr. Ian Kendall. Ian, please tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hello. So, my name is Ian, if you don't know me. I am a magician from Edinburgh in Scotland. You probably know me, if you do, from the Fringe. I've done 28 fringes consecutively now, not all on the street, but I did start on the street. We'll talk about that in a wee bit. I've worked around the world in pretty much every venue apart from children's shows and illusionists. And that's pretty much the short bit. I've done a lot of all kinds of things in my life, but we're talking about magic today.
What kind of things? Just briefly, what kind of other things have you done in your life?
Oh, crikey. Well, my career path has not been what was prescribed for me by the careers advisor at school. I've been a barman and a waiter, because everybody has. I've been a shop manager. I've been a commercial pilot and a flight instructor. I've been a masseur. I've been a parachute packer. I've been a fencing coach. I've been an IT consultant. I've been a teacher. A number of different things, but my main things have been magic, IT, flying, and stuff.
So just a few things then. So Ian, to begin, why perform? Why choose this life when you obviously had so many other options in front of you?
Do you know what? I don't think option is the word. Because option implies choice. And I am a believer that this is going to sound more pretentious than you could possibly imagine. I think we're called. I really do. I think for the majority of people that I know and have known over the last 30 years who are performers, they are drawn to performing. And it may be an addiction to applause. It may be attention requirement. You need to be the center of attention, although I think that's small. But for the most part, the physical, not the physical, maybe the physiological, but the emotional attachment that we have to performing, I believe, is very much within the person. And you can tell this because over the years, I know you know loads of people who have come to the life and left the life because they can't do it. And those are the people that have chosen it. But the people who the life chose, if you want to get really pretentious, we're the ones that are still here. And I've done a lot of things. Some things were necessity. Some things were, again, a calling. But for me, performance is, I don't know, it's just something. It's something I need to do.
Okay, so let's go to the beginning. How did this start then? What was the beginning of this story?
My 5th birthday. Seriously, 1973, March 20th. My mum had booked this guy called Poz, who was a kids entertainer, and he came and he said to me, "Hi, what's your name?" He goes, "My name's Ian." He says, "Is it your birthday?" "Yeah," like you didn't know. He goes, "What's behind your ear?" And I went, "Nothing." He pulled an egg out of my ear. And that completely blew my mind. At 5 years old, I was like, "Oh, hallelujah." And so I did what I call boys' own magic, which was the kind of self-working tricks that you get from the back of boys' own annuals in the 70s, which were books you would get at Christmas time. Things like, really the stuff everybody knows. And then when I was 17, I discovered sleight of hand and became obsessed. I was doing 8 hours a day practice for the first 3 years and just delved into it. And
can I ask you this? Were you a nervous young child? Because I tend to find a lot of the magicians I know, the reason they really became so obsessed with magic was because they struggled to talk to people, and they used it as a way of engaging.
No, my childhood was not happy. I think you know this. I'm autistic. I'm on the spectrum. I'm very high functioning, but I'm there. And when I was 7 years old, my parents divorced and I was sent off to boarding school in 1976. And I spent 11 years in boarding school with no friends, not a single friend for 11 years, bullied mercilessly every single day from 7:30 in the morning till whenever I went to bed at night. There was just constant abuse for 11 years. So my childhood was not typical with most people. I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, magic. You see the adverts, learn magic and get confidence and so many people, but that genuinely wasn't me. I could talk to people, but I was just really, really annoying. So it wasn't, I don't think that was the case. I was just your typical high functioning Aspie who found something he loved and went for it.
Yeah, so you're 17, you're starting to learn sleight of hand.
17, around about 1985, I had a study mate. So in boarding school, I know we've discussed this offline in the past, but this has been in my mind a lot in the last few days. I've tried to explain to people what boarding school was like, or rather people have asked me to explain what boarding school is like. And it's a bit like Vietnam, and not in the way that it's full of atrocities and misery, but the fact that if you weren't there, you will never understand it. I literally cannot possibly explain to anybody who wasn't part of that life what that life is like. So I try not to. But you have a study when you get up in the school, when you're sort of 16, 17, 18, you're no longer studying in a room in a desk with people in your house. You get your own little room. And for a while you share with one other guy, and then you have one to yourself for the last year. You have a study, and that's just your room. So I shared a study in 1 year with a guy called Hamish Ross, who was an amateur magician, and he wasn't anything serious, but he had a couple of simple books and he had some copies of Abra, which he let me read. And if you don't know Abra, it's a weekly magazine that takes 3.5 minutes to read, but it had some stuff in it in the 80s. And that's how I got my early stages into sleight of hand. And then in 1986, I left school. I took a year off between school and university, and I ended up down in London. And I was going to sell Svengalis in Harrods before Marvin for David Cronin. And I discovered Davenports. And oh my, that was a black hole for money. I was working in first in the city, and then I worked in Harrods book department for 6 months. And I would basically sign my paycheck every week or every month to Davenports, and I blitzed into that.
So can we just go back a tiny bit? So
yeah.
When you went to London, you're already a competent magician by this point, I assume.
No,
or competent-ish.
I was a very, very arrogant, average 1 year magician. I thought I was the mutt's nuts. I thought I was better, not better than everyone, but I thought I was several orders of magnitude better than I was. Because when I look back, I was actually, when I first got to London, I was the guy who had a magic book for 6 months and practiced a wee bit. Bobby, did you ever meet a guy called Bobby Bernard? Do you know who I mean by Bobby Bernard?
Oh, the name rings a bell,
so
but I can't place it.
Bobby was a magician, quite well known. He was friends with Alex Elmsley and Roy Walton and that lot back in the 60s and 50s. And he used to sit in Davenports and pontificate. I had lessons from him in the 80s. The first thing he ever said to me was, "You're being a cunt." That was it. Well, hi, Bobby. My name's Ian. Nice to meet you. No, when I first got to London, I was decidedly mediocre. There are some that would say that I'm still decidedly mediocre, but marginally less mediocre than I was back then.
And so when you went to work in the city, was that because you had schooling that would support?
No, Christ, no, not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. My grandmother lived in London, and I went down to visit her for a week, just to visit. And the thought of going back to my home with my mother and stepfather, which was a bit of a war zone in darkest Northumberland, the thought of going back and doing a year there just drove me spare. So I said, can I stay here? And I was doing temping jobs in the city. There's something called a confirms clerk. It's the lowest possible low job you can have within the financial institution of this country, earning something like £3.26 an hour, I think was my hourly rate, which wasn't bad in the 80s, but not what you could live on in London. So yeah, I didn't go in and work in the financial institutions because I had an education in finance. I knew it because I could spell and file things, which is what I was doing. But no, my stay in London was very much just avoiding going home.
I'd say this very quickly. I always know I'm into a magician because I can hear the sound of cards being ruffled.
I've just put them down. I've put them down. I have a deck.
So you're working there, you're doing odd jobs, you're basically, by the sounds of it, obsessed with magic. You're taking all your money and spending it in magic shops.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
So I was in London for a year, and then I had a bust up with my an old childhood friend that I was sharing a flat with in a place called Willesden Green in North London. And he decided that he and a few friends were going to beat me up and rob me. And this is the guy I was sharing a flat with a name on the lease. And I was a little bit unhappy about that. So I basically went back to Northumberland, where I then went for a dental check. And my dentist said, come to the parachute center. You can pack parachutes for £1 a time. And I'd done some skydiving in a couple of years earlier, 3 years earlier when I turned 16. Or parachuting in those days. That wasn't free fall. And so I went to the drop zone and I packed rigs for a couple of weeks, and then I retrained and was skydiving for that's another story. Then I went to university.
It's okay. This is your story. Did you enjoy skydiving?
I loved it. I did. I had I had a double malfunction, which is where both parachutes failed to open. Which was kind of scary. I finally got the canopy open, the reserve open at 600 feet, which is 3 seconds to impact.
Wow.
I hit
injuries then?
No, I bizarrely, the thing that hurt most there is because I had the parachute I had was the double on the back. So everything you see in the movies was one of those. And the main parachute is at the bottom, and that didn't open. So basically I had a thing about, it's only 10 inches by 6 inches by 4 inches strapped to the small of my back, which is not usually there. And I did what's called a PLF, which is a parachute landing fall, because I had a round reserve instead of a square parachute. And so I did a PLF with a big thing on my back. So it was like being punched in the kidneys when I landed. So that was a bit unpleasant. But I had so much adrenaline going through my body, I didn't necessarily feel that. My main accident was I hit a fence post at 50 miles an hour, which should have killed me, but didn't. But it did put pay to my athletic. I was a competitive athlete for a while. I was a fencer. And I used to jog a 5-minute mile in training. And now I can't run 100 meters. And my right leg is gefixt. But I went to university, and I was still, I hooked up with some Edinburgh magicians, and I was...
So in the University of Edinburgh, what are you studying in university? Electrical
engineering. The full course was electrical engineering and microelectronic fabrication with a side course in computer science. It's basically building microchips.
And so why did you go for that? Is that like a career you thought, I want to do? I can do that? Or was it you need to have a career kind of thing? Or
No. So I said at the start that my careers advisor at school. So I went to a place called Fettes College in Edinburgh. I think if you've ever been to Edinburgh, you might have heard of it or seen it. Tony Blair's old school. And I went to a careers advisory when I was 15 or 16, around about that age. And the careers advisor, a guy called Alan Tothill, who was my biology teacher. And it went in, I was hell-bent on being a fireman. Seriously, when I was a teenager, I just wanted to run into burning buildings because that's where my head was. And I went in and he said, so what do you want to be? He says, I want to be a fireman. And he goes, no, you don't. You want to be an electrical engineer. And I went, no, okay. And I mean, I've always been a geek. I've got old computers sitting on the shelf here, the ZX81 and stuff. And I'm into electronics and this kind of thing. So it was one of the few times that I was actually given good advice by an adult. But so I went to electrical engineering and lasted 2 years before I had a breakdown in university. Here's the thing, and I'll touch on this briefly because I don't want this session to be dwelling on this. If you take a 7-year-old child and you tell them every single day for 11 years that they're useless and worthless, by the time you get your 18-year-old, they're going to be a little bit messed up. And so that was the environment, that was the mental environment in which I went away to university. And so I was very, very not in the right place for it. And a friend of mine sorted my head out afterwards, but at that stage, I had dropped out. I did 2 years and I went off to the States to be a commercial pilot. Right about the time when the Gulf War started, 1990 and 91. So my aviation career was one of the shortest ones ever because I qualified and then all the airlines went bust. And then I came back to Scotland when my visa ran out and I was homeless for 3 months. September, October, November, and half of December of 1991, I was homeless. And then I got a flat and a job.
Was that because you didn't want to go home?
Oh, going to Northumberland was never an option. Never. And I'd been in Edinburgh at this stage for 10 years. And my home is now Edinburgh. Although technically I'm a Geordie. I'm Scots-ish dad, Geordie mum. I've lived in Edinburgh since 1981. I consider myself to be a Scot from Edinburgh, despite the fact that I am, as a taxi driver said to me in 1983, you're just a domiciled Englishman. But going home was not an option. So I'm homeless. I'm sofa surfing, and I get a job, and then I get a flat. And the job lasts 6 months, and I couldn't hack that. It was. And do you
not imagine? Just before we go on, you're a magician. You're doing magic all this time. Do you not ever think to use the magic to earn a living during this time?
Well, yeah. See, and this is it. So I was. It was always a hobby of mine, and at that time I never ever considered being a performer, because I was still an extremely messed up puppy. And to be fair, I was going to be a pilot. That was my thing at that stage. And I lasted 6 months at Edinburgh Crystal, and I quit that. And all of a sudden,
what's Edinburgh Crystal?
Edinburgh Crystal was it was in Pennycook, which is a suburb in the southwest of Edinburgh. And it was a fine crystalware place. It went bust 20, 30 years ago, but it was like really expensive crystal decanters and glasses and trophies and that kind of thing. So I got a temp job there, and then they took me on. And all of a sudden, I've got no job, and I didn't get any housing benefit. I was signing on. I remember that my dole at the time was £35 a week, and my rent was £45 a week. And I was never late with my rent. And I worked for 6 months. I was living on about £2 a day. So wow. lots of pasta, lots of rice, not much else. And it's lucky because I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. So my outlays, I can survive on that, but it wasn't pleasant. And then in the summer of 1992, a friend of mine was what's called a sabbatical, and sabbaticals are students who take a year out to run the student association. And they had booked Magic Bob Coletti, who's Edinburgh's top magician at the time, to do the graduation ball. But Bob got sick. So Fiona phoned me and said, "Will you come and work the ball?" And I was just like, yeah, okay. And I panicked a wee bit because I didn't actually have an act at the time. I just had a bunch of tricks. And I practiced for 3 solid days to get a set together. And I went and I worked the grad ball. And I did the gig for £60 for 1 hour because I wanted to earn £1 a minute. And that was my first gig. And then that was the start. And then I was working restaurants and gigs.
How did it go?
Oh,
What was the first experience like?
Do you know what? It was fine. It was because basically what I did was I was doing the same core routines that I had been showing people. I mean, you got to remember, in my university year, my conversation was, do you want to do a parachute jump? Because I was running the parachute club. And if not, do you want to see a card trick? And I was doing stuff all the time. So I had a set. And I went up my opening, and I've said this in a magic interview before.
Yeah.
My opening was, has anybody dropped a white penknife? How about a black one? And I did the color changing penknives. And that is the cheesiest, corniest opening you could possibly have. But I did it. And I did my hour and people were happy. And then I just started getting gigs. And then that was it. I did magic for the next however long.
And just really gradually moving through this. Okay. So you've done your first gig.
Yep.
It's gone well. How did you start getting gigs? Did someone come up to you at the end of the gig? Did you actively go and try and find gigs?
I am the world's worst person at finding work. I am just terrible at it. And if I knew how I got gigs, I would try it again because I honestly have no idea. Agents would call me up. I want to loop back because there's something that's important about this, because this is how I started on the street as well. And I was kind of weird because I started street, stage, and close-up at the same time. Most people would do close-up for 5 years and then maybe do a street show and then maybe go on a stage. I started everything in 1992. In 91, I spent the summer, I actually came back from America where I was doing my flight training. I came home because I needed to take a CAA exam instead of an FAA exam. So I needed to take
What's CAA exam?
CAA is the Civil Aviation Authority. FAA is the Federal Aviation Authority. So it's the British equivalent of the American license. So I needed to take an exam in Scotland. So I came back and I spent this August of 1991 hanging around watching Gazzo on the Mount. Gareth mentioned this when we were talking with Gareth a couple of weeks ago. He talked about this period, and that was when we did it. So I was hanging out with Gazzo, and I thought, I could do street stuff. This is easy. And I remember showing Gazzo a card trick, and he just goes, the stuff you're doing won't work on the street. And I was like, but I'm fantastic. How could you say that to me? Ha 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 ha. So fast forward a year, and it's coming up to the summer of 92 again. So after I've done the grad ball in July, and I think I could work the fringe. I'll be a millionaire. I make so much money. And so I hooked up with a friend of mine called Martin Hunt, his name was, and he was a juggler, and I was the magician, and I could juggle as well. And we came up with the idea of the show. We were going to do a double-header show, passing balls, not clubs, because we couldn't afford clubs, passing balls, stopping, doing a trick, and whatever. We planned all this. And then we would go out in the meadows and we practice for 6 weeks before the fringe. And then Martin got ulcerative colitis, which ulcerative colitis, which is a particularly unpleasant bowel disease, which put him in hospital for months. And I went to see him in hospital. I'm like, but we've got an act. What are we going to do? And all of a sudden, I'm like, what do I do? And he gave me the blessing to go out and try by myself. So we appear in August 1992, the first fringe. Now, I'm sure many people have told you about those days in the fringe, but the street performing was only on the Mound. There was not, the high street was still a road. There was nothing organized. The Sam and Andy pretty much organized it. And it was a bit like a branch office of Covent Garden. people would come up, but there was one, what is now Mound 1, up at the south end of the mound by the art gallery. That was the main pitch. The pyramid wasn't there. And everything north of the pyramid, so towards Princess Street, was known as the jungle. There were no railings around the edge, so people could sit on the steps. And you would have literally 6 shows going on at once, next to each other.
Wow.
Six shows. And each show was about the size of one of the squares. You know, on the mound floor, they've got those squares that are about 20 feet wide. Each one was that big. And everybody would be on. And it was a jungle. And I went out thinking that I was going to make hundreds of pounds, because I had seen Gazzo make a good sizable hat. And I was just like Gazzo. I can't remember what my first hat was, but my second hat was 27p.
Wow.
2 10s, a 5, and a 2p. Right? That was my hat. I did about 7 shows a day.
Before we go on from there,
yeah.
How did it feel? What explain the experiential qualities of this?
Well, here's the thing. I've always been a very, very quick learner. And it all ties into my expectation of what actually happened. So when I realized that I couldn't do my 2-man juggling show with Martin, I designed a new show. And the main part of the show was I made a small child disappear, vanish in the middle of the mound. That was my trick. And it was exactly as bad as it sounds. So I'll talk about that in a second. But when I looked in my hat, I honestly can't remember what my first hat was, but it wasn't more than £1. I know that. And I'm looking at this 27p, and Captain Reality hits me on the back of the head with the wet salmon of truth and goes, "You may not be a millionaire by September. This may not be happening." So I realized that I had to adapt. And for the first 4 days, I was doing about 7 shows a day. If you can imagine getting in 7 shows a day, and every single show was different. Every single show I did was I was throwing in stuff. I was improvising. I had a guitar. I was doing Elvis impressions. I'm quite proud of one line I improvised. At one time, a Diet Iron Brew can blew into my pitch. I was right in the north by where the pagoda is, and I picked it up and went, "Made from aluminium girders," because of course Iron Brew is made from girders, and I improvised that, and apparently now it's a thing. So go figure. Anyway, so I was doing this for 7 days, and probably if I got £20 a day, I was happy. But I realized,
so you're essentially workshopping by the sounds of it.
Yeah, but I was in the worst possible way. But I realized after day 1 that this was not going to be a retirement plan, and I now had to learn. So I'm very, very analytical. I'm alarmingly autistically analytical. So I was watching everything that I did. I mean, I almost cut my finger off with scissors on one and bleeding through a show, so I dropped that. And on the Wednesday of week 1, somebody who I think it was Dominic, can't remember his second name, said, "I'm going down to London. Do you want anything from Davenport's?" And I said, "Yeah. Could you get me a swallowing the razor blades kit?" So he said, "Yeah, sure." So I give him £15, which was the cost of it. And he goes down London, and I do Thursday. I'm still doing my 7 shows of shite. And on Thursday afternoon, he comes back, because it was literally a day trip for him. He went down for something on the train, came next back, and he gives me this set. So on Thursday night, I go back to my flat, which is on Rose Street, and I get these instructions, and I create a routine for the razor blades. And I go out on Friday, and I do the razor blades, and that remained my show. That core show built around the blades It was a rope routine. The early stuff was different, but basically that core routine I then used for 6-7 years.
So what did it feel? And just getting into, rather than just the function of it.
Yeah.
When you did the razor blade routine, how did it go? Did it go well in that show? Did it work? Did you get a sense of it working?
It did, and there was a light bulb moment. There was a genuine, oh, got something here. Okay, you're not going to starve. Now, again, for the first week, the routine started off at like 3 minutes, and then grew to 15 minutes because I was adding bits and I was doing lines and what have you. And I was, every time I was adding stuff on, it helped. And it grew, but there was.
What were you thinking about when you were adding stuff on? What were you thinking about? Was there a specific thing you wanted to achieve? Was it just throwing things in? What did you have? A method to adding things?
No method. I was just throwing shit at the wall and see what stuck. I didn't have the self-awareness, and this is a spectrum thing. I don't have the self-awareness to be able to say, right, here is, I did that and this happened and therefore I made more money for doing that. I'm better at doing that now, but back then, absolutely not. I was just saying something, and if it made a laugh, if I got a laugh, I kept it. It was that. Now, I was very lucky because that year, 1992, 2 people took me under their wing. And I want to talk a wee bit about the mound in those days. There's a guy called Alan Kempthorne. I don't know if you know Alan, who was a smaller. He lives in Wales now. Does a lot of sort of kids parks and what have you. But he was in the what do they call it in Covent Garden? Not the main plaza, the piazza.
Indoor pitch?
The indoor pitch. He sort of worked there in the days before Magic Corner. Yeah. And a guy called Dave Wolf, who I talked about him at the draw this year because it was 20 years since he left us. And Dave and Alan took me under their wing, and they gave me advice and they gave me tips and they told me what was working and what wasn't working. And towards the end of the run, we actually had a 3-way show. We called it 4 Fat Ladies because we were 3 skinny men. And we did some shows. There's some photographs on my Facebook of it. And they were fun. So Alan and Dave basically taught me street performing. But the other people, so you probably be aware of this, but when you are the new kid on the pitch, you are basically treated like a can to be kicked around. There was no respect at all from the other performers. Now Sam and Andy, Sam left us last year sadly, but Sam and Andy were always lovely to me. I mean, they were beyond nice. I remember one time I was going to do a close-up gig that night, and there was a little queue for this sort of the 6:30 show on the mound, and there was only one audience there. And Sam and Andy were about to go on, and I went up to Sam and said, Sam, I've got a gig in an hour. I have a 20-minute show. You're going to take all the money off the street in 45 minutes. Can I quickly go on? And they went, yeah, sure. And they let me do my bit. They let me take my 20 quid. And then I went on. So Sam and Andy were always lovely to me. The other guys played with me. I mean, you mentioned Dave Pickens earlier. Dave, I'm not being nasty because Dave was nice.
We've got Dave coming up next month, I think.
Yeah, Dave was really he was nice. He did a double act with a guy whose name I can't remember. He was a bald guy, I remember. And I can't remember his name. I've been racking my head for the last couple of days trying to remember. And one of the things he did was he would get a can of juice and he would suction cup it to his head because he was bald. So he would have 2 cans of Coke on his head. And they would basically run into my show, run into the middle of my show with his horns will go, "Hey, we're doing a show over there," and run back. And 70% of my audience would go and watch them. So I would frequently have my edge stolen from me because I was the new guy. That's what happened on that year. But it was I didn't even try to work on the South pitch. I didn't even try to go to the big pitch in that first year. I just went.
Was there a feeling of, I've heard this of other people, that they kind of, people want one less person on the pitch. They don't want to, they're happy to share with people they know they aren't going to be able to push off. But if they believe they can get rid of, if they believed, because it's not like that now, but if then they believed they could just, be a bit of a dick to you and you wouldn't come tomorrow, they do that maybe. Is that the kind of feeling you got?
I don't think that was the case. I think they were giving me a hard time, probably to see if I was going to stick it. I think they were, there was someone who they could play with or mess with. And we'd hang out at the end and we'd joke, and there was nothing. I don't think it was malicious. It was, I spent my entire life being bullied, so I know what that's like. So I don't think there was any maliciousness to it. But I was definitely a wee bit of a whipping boy for that year, certainly.
Would you describe maybe as rough play?
Hazing. Paying my dues.
And so what did you feel like at the end of that month then? What was the sensation as you've gone from the shock and horror of not being a millionaire at the end of the year to getting a kind of show together, being hazed through this month? What's Ian's feeling at the end?
I felt pretty good, actually. I felt okay because I'd done a couple of spots in the Fringe Club Cabaret Bar, which is my first sort of foray into stage work. I could see that this was something that will feed me. Won't feed me a lot, but it's a good, and I was not daft enough that I couldn't see that it was a good way to learn. The street is a very, very good place, as you know, to learn crowd control, pacing, material selection, all that gubbins. So in that respect, I felt okay at the end of 92. I wasn't worried. And this was, again, at the end of the 6 months from which I was living on baked beans and rice, and I could actually eat, which was a novelty. And I started working in restaurants, initially for food, which I know is not cool, but when you've got no food, it's actually a good way to do it. So yeah, I felt pretty good at that stage.
Yeah, I mean, when you say it's not good to work for food, you say it's not good to work for food because.
Okay, so there's I got some trouble with this with Edinburgh Magicians. I did a couple of restaurants, and then I worked in late 93. Was it late 93? No, late 92. I went to a restaurant in Edinburgh called Papa's, which was the sister restaurant to Mama's in the Grassmarket. It was on Victoria Street. It's now a Mexican restaurant. Anyway, I went to see the boss. Now, the boss is a guy called Angus MacInnes. And the name won't mean anything to you, but Angus MacInnes was Gold Leader in Star Wars. He was he's a big gruff Canadian actor who lived in Edinburgh, and he was British cinema's gruff American du jour. And he had this restaurant with his friend. And I went in and said, I'm a magician. I would like to work in your restaurant. And his face fell, and he said, I will work for tips and food. Now, he went, yeah, okay, you'll do that. And I got a plate of food twice a week, and I got some tips. The magicians who thought that I was taking their gigs away, but there wasn't, because there was no gig there until I went there. The idea of working for tips in the magic world is frowned upon, because you should be working for money, and if you're not working for money, you are taking work from a professional. And in those days, I was not considered a professional. I was just this arrogant.
So it's kind of like a union thing. The painters don't do carpentry, and the carpenters don't do this kind of thing. If you went and worked for nothing, you undermine the entire working industry, so to speak.
Yeah, a bit like that. A bit like that. You know, it's like when people come and say, will you work our festival for exposure? You know, can you buy food with exposure? No, you can't. But at the time,
Most
when
of the
I
time,
had
the
nothing,
exposure's bullshit anyway.
yes, exactly. But at the time, I got some food. I got a good meal, cooked meal twice a week, which kept me healthy because the rest of the time I was still eating, dry rice and pasta. And I learned my close-up set. I developed a close-up set, which I've now used for 25 years. Pretty much the same set.
And can you talk about developing it? Just really gradual, really detailed description of you developing that piece, because people will listen and they're going to try and do the same thing you do.
Okay, so yeah, developing a set for table hopping is a very, very strange thing. It takes a long time. What I did was I started when I was at Papa's. I'd done another restaurant before called Ike's, a pizza place, where I was just doing tricks. I was just like, here, let me show you this. Let me show you this. What have I got in my pocket? Whee! And it was terrible. And what I realized when I was at Papa's is that I would have the same 3 routines I would do at the start. And I always started with a ring and rubber band. And then I did another ring trick and another rubber band trick. And these 3 were my opening. And then I would do 2 or 3 other things that I had in my pockets. I'd always carry, 8 to 10 different things. And it would work. And then basically what happened was I realized that I had stopped doing other routines and I was always doing the same 4 or 5 things and I was doing them in the same order. And then I realized that I was saying the same thing between each. So I'm writing links, but at no point did I sit down and write the link. It's just
refined through experience.
Just hundreds and hundreds of times over the course of 20, 30 tables a night for 2 or 3 nights a week for a number of months. And it molded so that by the time I left Papa's and went to Old Orleans, which is another restaurant I went to, I spent 18 months at Old Orleans, and my set that I did there is, if I go and I do very, very few close-up gigs now, but if I do a close-up gig now, tomorrow, the set that I do will be 95% the set that I did in Old Orleans in 1994, because I've been doing it all the way through.
And because you got to a point of refining it in that year you were there, to the point where why change it? It's not broken, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's very much it. I mean, I have you can't see. I mean, my office is just a palace to not growing up. I've got that is all magic stuff, and I've got that's all magic stuff. I have got hundreds of routines. I could, if I wanted to, sit down and do 3 or 4 hours of close-up magic without repeating anything off the top of my head with the stuff lying around here. But I still do the same 12 minutes of a close-up because I have not at this stage found something that I want to replace one of my other routines with. And you've also got the thing that if I've got something that I've been doing since 1994 solidly, I know, because I have done it, that I can do that routine in my sleep. I have fallen asleep while performing at a Christmas gig in Old Orleans, and I woke up doing a coin trick with a packer for a card trick. And I sort of woke up, and this four-top look at me going, really? So although I have a lot of material, I don't have a reason to change it up that much, because, as you say, it works.
You doing it at the same time, or are you going around doing tables? Is this the kind of thing you're doing at this point in 93, I believe we're into now, yes?
Yeah, we're about 93. I'm working restaurants, and this was still at Papa's in 93. And I'm going in on Friday, Saturday night for 3 hours, sort of 7 till 10 type thing, going up to all the tables, doing a table, learning my trade. And my father had, I sort of tracked my father down a couple of years earlier, and he died in March 93. And I thought, right, I'm going to go around the world. I'm going to leave my flat, pack everything up into a rucksack, and I'm just going to go. Have a nice day, and I'm just going to be an itinerant wanderer, because I can street perform now, which means I can earn money anywhere. And I bought a ticket to Australia. I did a drugs trial. I was a medical guinea pig, for which I was paid £750, and that paid for my ticket to Australia. And I've been told to go to a place called King's Cross in Sydney by somebody who didn't like me, obviously. And I turn up in King's Cross on I think it was a Tuesday night, middle of the night. And I'm walking around and think, right, I will now go and I'm going to earn so much money, maybe a Wednesday night, and I'm going to be fine. I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to have 2 years of just being awesome, because I'm awesome. So the arrogance was still there. And so the next morning, I get the train in from King's Cross into the centre of Sydney. And you've been to Sydney ever? You don't know it? Okay, so the main pitch was on a place called Circular Quay, which is essentially a bus stop for ferries. It's about probably half the width of the high street. It's the whole thing, and it goes along for about a mile. And that was the pitch. So I go down there at 10 o'clock on, I think, a Thursday in September, Wednesday or Thursday. It's one in the middle of the week. And I look at it, and it is tumbleweeds. It is the high street in February. There is nobody there. And bear in mind, I've got about 4 days' money with me. That's all I've got, because I spent all the money on the plane ticket. I've got no money. I was going to earn it. So I go.
Are you staying in a hostel at this point?
I'm staying in a hostel.
Maybe you mentioned it, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm staying in a hostel. And
so it's not even like you can think, oh, well, I can sleep in my friend's flat and figure out what's going on.
I didn't know at all. I just basically turned up. And I'm looking at this tumbleweed, the quay, and I sat down on the bench, and I just thought, I'm going to starve. I'm the other side of the world. I don't know anybody. What am I going to do? And I looked, and I saw over there the Opera House, Sydney Opera House, and I thought, right, I'll go and console myself by looking at the Opera House. So I go back into town, a mile into town, and a mile that way, and 2 miles up to the Opera House. I didn't know you could walk around the quay. I didn't know you could get there that way. So I do a 4-mile trip to go to the Opera House, and I look at that for a bit, and I'm feeling utterly miserable. I've got no clue what I'm going to do, because I can't work a street like that. Where's the slow build? I just can't do it. And I go for a walk a bit, and I come back, and I see JP McKendry, who I'd known. JP's one of my oldest friends. I met him in '92 in the first year when we both started. He's doing a show, and one of his spectators helping him in the show is the guy who was 2 beds down from me in the drugs trial. And he had taken his money and just traveled and was about to go home. And I had waited and saved and just met. And so I hooked up with JP, and then everything was fine, because I had a touchstone. And Damien was there, Sally Kipton, Judge the Poet was around at that time. And
would you like to describe a few of these people? Just give us an idea of who they are, what they did.
Okay, so does anybody not know JP? You know,
maybe people do, but potentially
hippie Jesus
could be viewed by aliens in 1,000 years.
JP is now, he's one of the top street performers in the world, I believe. Then he was a kid. He's about the same age as me, so he would have been in his 20s. And he did his juggling show, very different to what he was doing now. But we had hung out in sort of 92, 93 a lot on the Fringe, and were fast friends. And he did the big shows. He was doing the big ones. Then Sally Kipton was, I think she's a stand-up now. Sally did a unicycle show. I haven't spoken to her since 1994 when I came back, but she was lovely. Damien Ryan, I don't know if anybody knows Damien Ryan, tall guy, long red dreadlocks. He's got massive dreadlocks, and he was there doing a fire show. There's a guy called Judge the Poet. Now he's still going. I connected with him on Twitter just last year, and Judge did bespoke poetry. He would take 3 suggestions from the audience and then make up a poem on the spot, which was great. And he still does that. He's great. There was me. There was there was a guy called Dan Druff. I kid you not, the guy's name was Dan Druff. And we always thought
name, obviously, though.
No, his name was Dan, and his second name was Druff.
So it actually was his name. It's not a performing name. It's almost too perfect.
I don't know. Well, I mean, we figured that was his name because he was sort of flaky and irritating. I don't remember Dan much. I remember that he used to perform in sunglasses. And even then, I knew you don't perform in sunglasses. You've got to have your eyes. And I had a massive argument on a Wednesday morning, a Wednesday afternoon, when it was about 100 degrees, 37 degrees Celsius. And I'd just come off a really shitty Wednesday morning show or lunchtime show. And Dan... I'd watched Dan's show, and he had blatantly stolen a line from my show, and I'm quite proud. I didn't in those days use any stock lines, and one of my lines has become a stock line for reasons I'll explain in a second. But I know that I wrote
just very briefly.
Yeah,
lots of people know. Can you explain to people what you believe a stock line is?
A stock line is one of those lines which nobody knows the provenance. It's been around forever. You know, hold up your wallet, take £1 out, put the £1 in your pocket, put the wallet in the bag. Take some money, fold it up. You know, where are you from? I'm sorry. No, I heard you. I'm sorry. These hack lines that don't have
take your parachute off, you've landed.
Yeah, that kind of, yeah. The thing, everybody knows them. Most people have used them. I've made a conscious decision, mainly because I came from magic at the same time, that I hope I didn't use the stock lines. And there's one, I'll tell you the story about this one line. I had a line, and I know that I wrote it because I remember writing it. And I know it's not a stock line because, you know, when I said that the first year everybody was hazing me, if I had used a stock line, or if I had stolen a line, I would have been told in no uncertain terms, can you not do that? No, so nobody called me up. And I was watching Scotty, you know, Super Scott Hutchinson, in a show that Conrad Riverland put on in the cafe downstairs in the city cafe.
This is many years later, yeah.
This is
many years later.
This
Scott
is 10 years
ago.
I
don't think he'd even have been an egg and a sperm by
no, not that. Yeah. He was not even at zygote stage. No, this is about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So Conrad put on a variety show in the basement of the city cafe, and Scott used this line, and I was at the back going, oh, I'm a little bit upset about that because that is my line. And I went up to him and said, Scott, you've stolen my line. And he said, I didn't steal it from you. I stole it from Chris Cross. Oh, God. So I thought, right, I've got to find out what happened here. So I emailed Chris, and I was expecting a fight. I was really expecting to bring up video evidence of me using this line from 1993, which is the earliest I've got of me on video using it, although I wrote it in 92. And I said, look, there's this line. Scott said it. I wrote this in 92. I know all this, blah, blah, blah. And Chris goes, yeah, fair dues. And what had happened, as far as I could tell, is that when I left Sydney in February of 94, my line stayed behind. But so there was this fight that I had. I'll tell you the line if you want to know it. But I was having this fight with Dan Droff about
if you want to tell it, you don't have to.
Oh, I'll tell it because provenance. It's basically, I would say, and I know it's mine because I have a follow-up line that nobody else uses. And it was a part of the razor blade routine. And I said, whenever Claire does this, you all go, ah. No, you go, ooh. And everyone goes, ooh. I said, you sound like a dairy farm on acid. And when Claire does this, you will go, ah, ah. And I'd like to thank everybody for not bleating after the dairy farm joke. So the line was, you sound like a dairy farm on acid for ooh. And I know I wrote that. If somebody wrote it years before somewhere else, independent invention, but I can trace that back.
Well, this is always the problem you have with this stuff, is that I've watched people who I know have sat and watched my show, and I know they've taken this bit from my show. I know, because not only is it a specific thing that I read about something that happened in my life, but I also can hear their intonation. They're aping my intonation, not on purpose, but because they're trying to do the line right as they've seen it. And then you ask them, you say, oh, I didn't take that line off you. That's not your line, blah, 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 blah. You bloody did. And then you meet someone else a few years later who did that line for 10 years.
Yeah.
Who didn't copy you. So who did come up with it originally. Because let's be honest, I mean, Dairy Farmer and Acid is a little bit more off-centre, but if you're going to turn around and say a lot of the things we do say to other people on the street, the gags we do, they have to kind of be simple because everybody has to understand them, you know?
Yeah, it's there. But I traced, because I talked to Mez about this and a few other people, and I traced how the line came from Australia and back. That's by the by. Interestingly, though, around about this time, around about 94, 95, I was doing stand-up gigs in London. I was going down to do comedy down in London, and probably around about 2000, I I was in a conversation with a bunch of comedians, and I said a line, and this guy goes, "Oh, don't steal other people's lines," and he was calling me up for stealing my own line that had stayed in London. And anyway, that's by the way. So
okay, there's a chap. Just before we go, you know a chap called Bruce Carroll. He came to London and he did a stand-up routine called My Friend Bruce, and he had a joke in his show, which is, "Why do crabs never pay the bill? Because they're shellfish." And someone came up to him after the gig and said, "You've stolen this guy's line," and he told me about it. And I thought, "Fuck me, my dad said that joke to me when I was about 5 years old." Like, where do we draw the line here?
It's hard. It is hard. I mean, certainly because I was in the Scottish comedy scene that was very divorced from the London comedy scene. And I found it very hard to write gags because my thought was somebody has to have thought of that in London. And then if I go down as the outsider, what do you do? What happens? I mean, I had a gag that I was doing a spot in a club called the Cosmic. I can't remember where it is. It's not there anymore, but it's a place called the Cosmic. And one of my lines was, I like playing audience participation X-Files. Okay? Every time Scully and Mulder say the word phenomenon, you go, ba 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 da da. And that was, and I thought, this is brilliant. Mark Thomas went on just before me, not before me, but as part of the set he was on, and he goes, "I'm going to try something out," and he looks at the audience and goes, "Phenomenon," And the whole audience goes, ba, 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 da, da. And I was like, well, I'm not using that gag. And it was just, you know, both everybody. I think I've heard 4 people say that gag over the years. I mean, it's.
And do you think it's coincidence? Do you think he maybe saw you before?
No, it's absolutely coincidence. Yeah, I talked to him about it afterwards. I said, I have that joke, and he was just like, yeah, it's not exactly rocket science to come up with that joke. Let's face it.
No, it's not. So, Ian, let's pull ourselves back. Let's go all the way back on track. Those heady years of 1995. Why now? You've got you've got a magic show. You've done your tables. You've done the street. You've figured out you can make money. You've gone to Australia. You've come back. You know you can do street magic and make money now. You know you can do circle shows. Why become a stand-up? Why do that?
Because I was losing my voice. And also, my long-time goal was not, at that stage, my long-term goal was not to be a street performer, a professional street performer. My goal was to be a corporate magician, because I knew at that stage that I could get paid considerably more money to rock up for an hour or two and either do a 40-minute stage show or a half-an-hour stage show or a couple of hours of walk around than I would get. I mean, I'll say numbers. Back in those days, in the 90s, the average for a 2-hour close-up gig was between 300 and 450 pounds in the mid-90s, compared with 50 quid in a good day doing street magic. And what you've got to remember is back then, back in the 90s, after the 22nd of August, or whenever the end of week 3 was, tumbleweeds. I mean, there was no street performing in Edinburgh outside those 3 weeks in August. So I would either have to move to London, which was never an option, or I was going to have to find someone else. So I did my first indoor fringe show in 1993. And I was doing street and stage for a long time and late night stuff. And I was trashing my voice. You know, there were times when I would go on to my evening show at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. And so in 1998, I made the decision to come off the street. I stopped doing street in 98 and just concentrated on stand-up work.
So in 1995, when you began doing this stand-up work, that was the thought, is that I'm trashing my voice, I earn more money here. Street performance is a temperate thing or a thing for traveling, and I want something that can sustain me in my home.
Yeah, I mean, busking, street performing, I hesitate to use the word busking, it's just fewer syllables, so it's easier to say like I make. But street performing has the buzz. It has the adrenaline. It has the feeling of when you have a killer show, you're on cloud 9 for hours. But if it's raining and you've been sitting on pitch for 5 hours in a puddle, and you do a show and you get 10 quid, and you think, why am I doing this when I'll get 20 times that for staying dry? I love street performing for all the reasons we all do, but I could see even then that it was not the be-all and end-all of my future.
So you take 3 years of kind of dipping your toe in, I take it then, from 95 to 98, testing it out, seeing what's going on.
I did. I mean, when I was in Sydney in 93 to 94, I did 4 months of 7 days a week, 8 hours a day busking, 3-4 shows a day, 7 days a week solidly, no days off. Then I came back, and for Streetwise, it was just in August. It was literally just August, while I was doing other shows. And when I stopped, here's the weird thing. I might have discussed this with you in the past, but people, buskers who are watching would know this. Once you have built an edge, and once you have taken a hat, you will never be a real person again. I don't believe you will never not be a busker. And
Can you explain more why you believe that?
Because there is let's be brutally honest for a second. Street performing is not easy. It's one of the hardest venues in which I have worked over the years. And I honestly believe that there is a certain, I don't want to say the word kudos, maybe, but there is a badge of honor that if you have, you have the guts, because let's face it, 90% of the magicians that I know who are close-up performers or stage performers or kids entertainers genuinely have told me that they do not have the guts to stand on an empty street and build a show. So I think that if you have done that, if you have joined I don't want to say brethren because we've got sisters as well, but the clan of international street performers, I believe, and this is just me, but I genuinely believe there is a respect, a mutual respect, that you could go to any pitch in the world and you are a street performer. Now, here's why this was a problem for me. I would on occasion visit London for work. If I had a gig down in London, I would go down. And I would more often than not swing by Covent Garden to see my friends, people who I see, once a year for 3 weeks, but I know them. And when I got to Covent Garden, I always felt very, very uneasy, mainly because I never worked Covent Garden. So although I've done busking in London, never Covent Garden. So I was not at that stage. We're talking about 98, 99, early 2000s. I was not an active street performer, but by the same token, I was not a real person either. So I felt really stuck in the middle. So I'm trying to think, how did I get into this one?
So we're at 98. You've became a full-time indoor entertainer at this point. We talked about street performance and how street performer, once you've done it, you're never the same again.
Yeah.
And then you talked about going to Covent Garden, how you felt like you had your foot in two worlds. You were a streety still, but you weren't quite a streety.
I don't even think I had my feet in two worlds, but I didn't have my feet in either world. Does that make sense? I wasn't.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, it was weird. But again, at this time, so in February of 1999, I was in London between 98 and 99, taking Microsoft exams because I was going to go work in IT. My wife phones me up and says, "I'm pregnant. Get a real job." And you can't really argue with that. So I went back into IT and I did that for 8 years, which curtailed my performing a lot. I was still doing the fringe, but I was doing a handful of gigs a year to keep my hand in. I wasn't full time. I was working as an IT consultant. And that went on until 2006. And in 2006, the banks collapsed. My last contract finished. And that was the end of my IT career. And I thought, what can I do? And I thought, right, I will now go back to street performing. And Todd Various, the Marmite of street performing, I went out with my old show. I went out with my razor blade show. And in those days, it was a Diablo. So I would build with a Diablo, and I would do a 100-foot Diablo throw. And I had a way I learned this in Australia. What I would do is you start in the build, and you have your mob. You haven't got an edge yet. You've got a mob. And I would say to everybody, right, I'm going to do a 100-foot throw. And it's not 100 foot, but a high throw. So I want everybody to take 2 steps back. And everyone takes 2 steps back. And I do the throw and I catch it. And then I'll say something else first, but I would catch it and I'd say, right, everybody come back in, and they all came into a perfect edge. It was my way of going from a mob to an edge straight away. So I'm standing just down from the steps of St. Giles. So west of the tree, up towards towards George IV Bridge. And I'm looking at the pitch, and I'm staring at the pitch, and I'm looking at the pitch. And I realize that I don't have the balls. I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. And I'm looking at the pitch, and I haven't done this for 6 years at this point.
And what are you terrified of?
Everybody else, first time they do a street show.
Wait, is there a logical terror?
No, it's completely irrational. And I walk, and Todd, bless his ginger socks, walked past me. He didn't come up to me. He walked past me and said, "Show's not going to do itself." And just walked on. And so I went out and I did I'm not going to say passable. I did an awful show. I got to the end of the show. I did it. I hatted it. I made some money, but it was 8 years, I think, since I last did a show. So obviously it was shit.
A little rusty, were we?
A little bit rusty. I did remember most of my lines, and I didn't fluff the trick, because here's the thing. When I went indoors into the comedy clubs, I basically took my 20-minute street show. So in sort of the...
So you were doing tricks? You were doing tricks inside the comedy club?
Yeah,
or?
yeah. Yes, I was a comedy... Yeah, I basically did my street show. I was doing, Rocky Raccoon and juggling and finishing with the razor blades.
I just find that quite interesting, because you don't see that anymore. You don't see variety and comedy together. Stand-up has washed everything else away,
Yeah, but people my mentor that he doesn't know is John Lenihan, who started on the street. Alan and David took me in 92, to see John Lenihan's show in the Pleasance. And I watched him and thought, that's what I want to do. And that's why my performing on stage is very close to John's. And
what does John do? What's the kind of stuff he does?
He just does magic. He just does comedy magic as an American. He's very, very, very good.
Why was it so inspiring then?
Because he was brilliant. He was so good. And I was laughing, and he looks, he's tall.
Don't make me be an English teacher and tell you to get your thesaurus out.
He was...
Why did you like him? Because he's brilliant, because he was good?
Well, yeah, he was... I think the case... It's a bit like Pause back when I was 5 years old. I watched John, and he was so relaxed on stage. He's so good. He's so relaxed. He was smooth. He was funny. He did good magic. And I just went, that's what I want to do. I want to be like you. Ooh. Yeah. Yeah. And so I had that. So I've been doing routines in comedy clubs all the way. Paul Zenon started doing that. Ian Kendall. There were people that in the 90s and 80s were doing variety in comedy clubs. But so I come back in 2006, and I'm trying to do my old show.
Just before we go on to that, I'm really sorry to do this.
No, go for it.
Were you doing indoor stuff when you were a computer programmer?
Very few.
Did you keep a little bit of it going? You did Edinburgh Freaks, but there was little bits here and there.
Maybe 5 gigs a year. Because it was hard. It was hard for me to book ahead because I didn't know where I was going to be. So I would do, I do stuff over Christmas, and I do the Fringe. I would do an indoor Fringe show and whatever, but not much. So Todd watches me for a couple of days trying to do my razor blade show, and he lends me a gib, a busker's pouch, and he lends me a set of cups, and we hammer out a routine, and I start doing a cups and balls show on the streets. And I did that for 6 years, doing cups and balls, I think.
And why did you and Todd decide to do the cups and balls as your thing on the street? I mean, I have my ideas, but
Well, one, because it's a classic of Magic, but I had always said that I wasn't going to do a Cups and Balls show because everybody else did. Gazzo did, James did, Cellini did, Mario did. So many people did Cups and Balls shows, and they're all the same, and I didn't want to do that. And then I thought, no, I can do it. And now I love Cups and Balls. I've got 4 sets there.
Yep, I can see
those are my 4 working sets. And Todd loaned me a set of cups and loaned me a game, and we hammered out a routine. And I went out to Glasgow to work Buchanan Street in Glasgow. And I found, actually, buried on a hard drive last year, I found a video that Todd took of my first ever Cups and Balls street show. It's awful. Wow. It's so bad. It's painful. Because I had forgotten everything I'd learned about the street, and I was doing fancy sleight of hand and everything, and it was bad. Nobody's ever going to see that video, I promise you. But Todd gave me a piece of advice that was given to him by Gazzo, because I first met Todd through Gazzo a few years earlier, and that was, I passed this on. He said, "Do you want to be a magician who entertains, or an entertainer who does magic? Because only one of those will make money." And that was a light bulb moment. That was a bing. And so I did my Cups and Balls show for certainly until 2:10, maybe 2:12. And I would be up by the Market Cross would be my pitch. The other guys would do. By this time, there was busking in Edinburgh out with the Fringe. So the other guys were on the main high street pitch, and I would be up by in between the tree and the Market Cross, and that would be my little pitch.
Can I just ask this then? So when and why did busking start happening in Edinburgh off the festival, and why was it not there before? If this is a new thing, what's the change, and Todd. Why did it need a change?
A couple of things. Todd and the Bollards. The Fringe.
Is that a rock band?
Todd, he probably has done it at some point. Basically, around about 24, maybe around about then, when Todd came to town, he started doing shows on the high street, because the high street was then pedestrianized, and it became more apparent that people were doing shows, and it was a slow build for the pitch. I mean, it took a long time, and 3 or 4 of us would go through. We'd get the train through to Queen Street in Glasgow, and we'd work Buchanan Street. And there was myself, Todd, Figo, Pop, Tom, Pop the Blue Man, Tim Eady, and Gilly was there for a wee while. And we would meet in Waverley.
Was that Gilly too from Israel?
Yes. And we would with half the haircut. And it was Gilly 1, not Gilly 2. And we would meet in Waverley at 10 o'clock, and we get the train through to Queen Street, and we'd work all day and come back. So sort of like 2006, 2007, I was a full-time street performer again, working 5 days a week.
Did it feel good?
Yeah, because I wasn't working in an office anymore, which I hated. It did feel good because my show got good. My Cups and Balls show got good. I would head out. I would do my shows, and there's loads of stories attached to that we don't have time for. And then we'd come home, and it was like going to work. It's like working in Glasgow. Then there were a couple of drunk performers whose name escaped me, who started working the pitch in Buchanan Street, and would get drunk and not attack, but verbally abuse the edge and the punters. and they basically killed the pitch. So
what happened? Why did they kill the pitch?
I don't know, because I
process.
stopped by the process is you've got, if you have an established pitch, as you know, you have people, the locals know that there's going to be a show there, and so they might on the lunch hour go down to Buchanan Street to see if there's a show, or they won't be as negative towards street performers if it is a pitch. We have that on the High Street now. We have that on Buchanan Street and in Glasgow, wherever. Then you get performers that start effing and blinding at children and are drunk and are abusive and are not very good. And all of a sudden, that pitch isn't a nice place to go to for your lunch hour. And fewer people will work there because you've got to deal with these guys who are being assholes on the pitch. And I think I had stopped going through by that stage for a reason that escapes me. But as far as I know, the Buchanan Street pitch is still dead. And there are an awful lot of very, very amplified musicians there. So
one of the reasons I didn't go there, I was told that it's just a noise battle. Everything's noise there now.
Yeah. So that was around about 26, 27. And I was still doing fringe shows. But I started... Yeah.
So I think one of the things we mentioned before is about you started to work in Edinburgh again. Am I right in thinking this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it just started opening up again. Is this a bit of rat now?
Mm-hmm. So I'm
sorry for interrupting you.
So
everybody loves.
I'm so sorry. I've got a load of minstrels because I'm trying not to eat them. So, yeah, I'm doing street shows out with the Fringe now again, and I am the world's now, because I'm old, I'm the world's most fair weather busker. I'll come out in August and maybe late July if it's not raining, and it's cold in Edinburgh.
But were you like that in 2008, 2009 when you first started working back in Edinburgh?
You dropped out, was it?
But so you said these drunk guys kind of ruined the pitch in Glasgow, and it seemed like around this similar time Edinburgh became viable to work during off season. So were you then working that off season?
I was, but not as much. Not as much. I would come up and put my table up by the cross, the Market Cross, and I would work up there for a couple of years, mainly weekends. It got to the point that one time a few years ago, I came out on Easter Sunday, and I put my stuff down. It was cold. It was April, but I had a good day, and I thought, yay, the season started. And I came out the next weekend, which is either the last in April or the first in May, whenever. And it was tumbleweeds. I literally could not stop a single person. I did no shows in 4 hours. And I realized I've come out 3 months early. You know, I had one good weekend, and I'm not a slow build guy. But yeah, so 2008 was streetable for a while. And then I sort of slowly drifted away from it. I was still doing shows in August, and I was doing my Cups and Balls show in the Alcoves. And then I, probably around about 212, maybe 211, 212, I changed my show to the Escape show that I do, my Circle show. But I was doing that in the Alcoves. And I had a very good year that year.
So just before we go on to doing that, why did you change? What was going through your mind as you made that decision?
I wanted a Circle show. I wanted.
But you could have sized up the Magic show. Why?
No. Yeah. No, I couldn't.
Why not?
No.
Why couldn't you? Just have interest.
Here's the thing with my Cups and Balls is I don't do a hat load. I don't do a hat load, which is a very big problem for my routine because there was no point in my cups and balls routine for me to stop and do a bottling speech. I had to go through the routine, boom, 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 4 balls, 6 balls, whatever, and don't go away because I want to talk to you about money. Where are you going? Come back, come back, come back, come back. So my hats were limited in that.
And just for people who don't know, a hat load is at the very end. With cups and balls, you produce small balls out of cups, and then you produce a large object like a melon or a head-size object at the end as a finisher. That's what he's referring to. Is that?
Yeah.
Yes. And so you didn't feel like it would function in a big show, and you didn't feel like taking Magic and trying to do kind of like big cards or something like this. It just wasn't something that you thought
that wasn't well. I sort of did do that to an extent, but to be honest, I bought the routine. I worked up the routine for the escape that you've seen me do, and I doubled my hats overnight. There's been 3 things that I've done where and for the people that aren't street performers, your hat is the amount of money you get at the end of the show, which is essentially the be all and end all of your show. And oftentimes a show will stagnate at a particular hat level, and I was floating around. In the first instance, I was floating around 40 or 50 pounds a show, and I didn't know what I could do. The first thing I did was I got a rope. I bought a rope, and I did the edge and belt, and that added 30 quid to my hat straight away. And the second thing I did was I started seeding the hat, and that means I would give away £5 to my helper, very, very overtly, and straight away that doubled my hats, literally doubled, and I was getting so much more paper. But that's the financial side. I wanted to do a big show because I realized the limitations of my cups and balls show. Excuse me, which was that I had hit the plateau of what I could have done with it.
The copper ceiling.
Yeah. I've never heard that before, but yes, the copper ceiling.
Yes.
So yeah, I developed the bigger show, and that sort of evolved into what I have now, which is I've basically been doing the same show for 4 years now. Before that, for the sort of 3 or 4 years before that, it was evolving, writing bits, and the same process that I went through in '92.
So you're still experimenting, throwing things out there, keep this, drop
throwing
this.
Things away more, trying things, but pruning the fat.
At what point do you say goodbye to stuff? At what point do you isolate it and remove it?
Wow, the hardest point. Honestly, if you and I've done this so many times, that if you write a bit, you write a line and you think, I've written this line, it's brilliant. And you go out and you use it and it doesn't work. And you try again and it doesn't work. And you just think these audiences just don't get it. They're idiots because they're not laughing uproariously at my genius line. And so, yeah, I had to cut stuff, and it's not easy. It's never, ever easy to edit your work. But I'm older and wise. I like to think wiser now, and I have a lot more self-awareness. So I can look at reactions. I can look at how people respond to a bit. And if it doesn't get a laugh twice, if it dies once, lines always die. But if it dies twice, it's on notice. If it dies 3 times, it's gone. So
you're quite militant with it then. 3 strikes and you're out. It's like the American legal system.
It is. And I believe that, and I think I took that from indoor shows as well, from doing stage shows. I have done some unbelievably abysmal shows. I mean, really, really bad. And I have them all on video. This box of videos I've got by my thing. I've got pretty much every show I've done since 1993. I've got on video. And I look back at when I thought I was just the mutt's nuts, and you know, why am I not on Channel 4, you bastards? And I look at it with the grey hair of age, and I go, oh, it's because you're a prick. That's why. I mean, I was lecturing at a magic convention last October in Orlando, because I'm at that stage now in my career where I get booked to go and teach people, which is really quite nice. And I was doing this early morning lecture, and we were talking about respect for your audience. And I got this woman, Gwyn, out. And Gwyn's lovely. She had been an assistant for Lance Burton in Las Vegas. And this is a genuine line that I used in Sydney. When I was working in Sydney and Melbourne, I used this line. I would get this woman out, and I'm this 25-year-old cocky guy, and I would hold her hand and say, have you got any Scottish in you? And she would say no. And I say, would you like some? And nowadays, I just cringe at that, because it is the most hideous thing to say to a stranger, to a woman. But at the time, I didn't have the awareness. But now I can look.
Yeah, you're empowered by the crowd there, aren't you?
And people laughed. That's what was worse, is that people laughed at the joke. The one thing I learned in Sydney, when I arrived in Sydney, because we're jumping around the timeline a wee bit, when I did my first 2 or 3 shows, they died. I had to completely rewrite my show for an Australian audience. And then when I came back from Australia, I had to rewrite it again for a Scottish audience, because the 2 shows there was different audiences.
But you dropped out for me. I don't know if you dropped out for everyone else. What did you write and have to rewrite again?
Oh, so when I got to Sydney in 93, in October or September 93, I had to completely rewrite my show because it did not work. I did 2 or 3 shows and it fell flat.
Changing of the time.
And it's not changing the time; it's changing of the jokes, the sense of humor. I had to rewrite all of my jokes, and then when I came back from Sydney to Scotland again in '94, I had to write the show again because I was better than I was in '93. So I wasn't using the same jokes in '93, but I had to rewrite again to fit in with Scotland. But as I was saying, now in the current time, I look back at myself from 25 years ago, and I just think, dude, you really, really need a slap, because I genuinely thought I was God's gift to magic, and I was at best mediocre.
But is that not the exuberance of youth? Is that natural, do you think?
Absolutely.
I don't know if you're alone with that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yes, it was. It was the fact that I was 24, 25 years old. I was standing up on stage and people were applauding me. And I was, the first 20 years of my life were hideous. The next 10 were fantastic. And the last 20, I've been married. So it's been those 10 years, sort of the 90s, were a time when I was king of my own wee kingdom. People would pay their money, to see me fuck around on stage for an hour. How can that not affect a 25-year-old's mind? And I didn't have the grounding, because I didn't have a traditional childhood. I didn't have the mental tools to deal with that. So if I was I often said that friends come and go, enemies accumulate. And if I was to gather together all the people who I've pissed off over the years, I would have to hire the Usher Hall, because there's just a lot of them. But that was just me. I like to think that I am not that person anymore. But I look at 25-year-old me and think, you know what? You're winging it.
Yeah, yeah, we're all winging it at 25. I think, I have a little opinion that we're all non-stop, even to the day we die. We're babes in the dark, screaming, not able to see and know what's around us. Just having to guess. So you've teach now. You teach magic. You're a lecturer for magic.
I do. I teach and I write. I've written for a couple of magazines in America. I've written a bunch of books. I did in 2004. I created something called the Virtual Sessions, which was the first ever online magic teaching thing. I mean, there's hundreds of them now, but I'm pretty sure I was first in
particularly right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of them, but I was first. So yeah, I'm lucky in magic, certainly, that I have a certain reputation. I have a name that people.
And how do you think you got that name? Is it just by constant work and constant presentation and caring about what you do?
Yeah, I think so. It's a combination of whatever. But if somebody said, how did you get your reputation? I don't know. Being around, working, people seeing what I do, and not being a mediocre prick that I was in years gone by. I have a bigger presence in America because I wrote for the two biggest magazines. I wrote for MUM and I wrote for Genie. So I am often very surprised when people know me who I have respected. I mean, I could mention names. I don't know if you won't know the magicians' names, but when I was in Orlando for this lecture, I went up to people to introduce myself because they was people who I admired, and they were like, "Yeah, and I know you." At Blackpool this year, a guy called Mac King, who's one of the best magicians in Las Vegas. I said, I've always wanted to meet Mac King. He goes, "Oh yeah, we've met in the past." No, we have not. But the people who I consider to be people that I admired knew who I was, and that still freaks me out to this day. I was talking to Billy about this, Billy Kidd, about this last week, or a couple of weeks ago. I am still utterly shocked, surprised, and somewhat bewildered with the amount. This sounds so arrogant. Jesus, I'm 25 again. The number of people who know who I am in a positive light, because there are loads of people who would go, Ian Kendall, but they tend to be people from the 90s.
Well, do you think it's just experience has turned you from the knobhead you claim you were into the reasonable, more grounded person you are now?
It's not a claim. So yeah. Oh gosh. I think life experience has got to have a lot to do with it. I think parenthood. My son was 18 a couple of weeks ago. My daughter's going to be 21 in a couple of months. That had a lot to do with it. I've calmed down a lot because I was a very angry man because of my mixed up. I was still holding an awful lot of chips on each shoulder from my youth. And yeah, I think attrition. The biggest problem that I have as an autistic person is that I don't process emotions in the same way that everybody else does. A lot of the time, I don't process emotions, full stop. And there's something about being on the spectrum that is atypical. And this is the one time that people think, are you really on the spectrum? Is that I am, for the most part, a better communicator than most neurotypical people. I'm articulate. I can speak well. I can speak confidently. And neither of those is traits of the autistic spectrum. I can do this purely through attrition, purely through having this job for 25, 30 years, that I have learned to be a good communicator. I wasn't always this articulate. I was annoying as all heck when I was 19, 20.
So did you treat it like the learning of a mechanical skill, like a faro shuffle or something like this, playing with a deck of cards? You learned communication in this same kind of mechanical manner?
I don't think there was, well, no, because it wasn't that conscious. It wasn't a case of, yes, now I will learn how to speak. It was just a gradual thing that I will do something, I will notice a reaction, and I will change. It's test and change, or change and test. And then over time, I can't say that it was a deliberate thing that I did. I didn't set out to become a good communicator. It's just something that happened.
Well, it sounds like it would be a byproduct of the things you chose to do. Because you chose to do performing and things like that, you have to become a good communicator.
Yeah, or I would not have been a good performer. Yeah, you got to be able to do it. Yeah. I mean, the street taught me to project, which is very useful in comedy clubs. I never used a microphone in comedy clubs. I would go up and I would put the microphone off to the side, and then I would project in them, which was, I think, strange to the Londoners. Because they're like,
I've only ever seen one other person do that, which again was Chris Cross.
Okay, why is this northerner shouting at us?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I never use microphones on stage. I do now on ships because I have to.
So you do cruise ships now?
Yeah, well, I did up until last year when everything went.
So what's the different experience from doing the street, the stage, and then the cruise ships? Because the cruise ships are a particular thing from what I've been told. Being a very anarchic, kind of trashy, homeless-looking performer, I don't get asked to go and do cruise ships. So, you're my little window into that world.
Well, I'm not the best window. There are far better people to talk to about it than me. Ships have been my goal for about 7 years. Because right now, they are the only place where you can do a stage show in a good theatre for good money. So I tried for years to get on. It's very hard to get in. I eventually got in, had a stumbling block, was starting back up again, and now we're on pause. But
why is it so hard to get in? Is it because it's a small group of people and they keep it between themselves, or?
Yeah, probably. But there's the thing about cruise ships is you can't be bad. There's no real place to be bad. So you have to be good to start with. And then you've got to get in. It takes a long time to get booked because they have their people. You get an agent. You've got to get an agent to see you. You've got to book and yada, yada, yada. I am lucky in the sense that I am, we talked about this the other week on the call. I am the most middle-class busker you'll ever meet. I've got the gray hair. I can talk about many different subjects. So I feel that I fit in far better on a ship now than I would have done 20 years ago, for example.
When you're young and angry and acerbic.
Yeah. And I mean, there are young people that do it, but not as many. Most of the performers on ships are in the later stages, shall we say. But ships, I consider myself to be very young as far as cruise entertainers go. I've only been doing it for 3 years, but it is a massive, massive privilege to be able to do that because you get paid to go on holiday, and a couple of times you'll do a show. It's easily it's still my goal, and ships will come back, and I will be waiting, and I hope they book me again because it's lovely.
Yeah, I mean that's something I think for everyone to remember is that this has happened before in terms of the the thing that's going on now for all of us, and it came back to normal. We were here normally before this happened again.
Yeah.
So things will get back to normal. So your plan after this is to go onto the cruise ships?
Yeah, that's my focus now. Yeah, I do very few close-up gigs anymore, mainly because the close-up market in Scotland died about 4 or 5 years ago when it sounds horrible, but a bunch of kids learned magic off YouTube for 6 months and started going out for pennies, and they killed the market. So now, when I said earlier that the going rate for 2 hours is about 400 quid, that was 20 years ago, and now the going rate is 200, 250. So it's
So
not
can I say
sustainable.
this? Were all those kids who learnt magic off YouTube, the only difference between themselves and yourself when you were young was you didn't have YouTube? But are they the kids that are going out and working for dinner and tips? Is that the same kind of thing? Is that you when you were young? Just because the internet, there's a lot more of them.
Well, the difference is now, in my day, this is going to sound like such a whinge and a complaint and a bitter old man.
It's called Whining On.
Take my work, you young
show is called Whining On. I don't know if he's paused. Is it me that's paused? Everybody. I don't know whether I'm the one on the line right now or that Ian's the one on the line right now. I've had a lot of problems with my internet at the moment. The position I'm in on the canal in London means that I don't get great signal. I will be moving tomorrow. I certainly hope it's him. He seemed like he had something interesting to say. I mean, maybe the connection's working. He's had a stroke. We don't know. Let's try and have a look. If you can see me, if I'm the one talking right now, if you can put it in the comment, that would be immensely helpful. Yeah, definitely it is me. We've just lost Ian. So we're kind of 15 minutes away from the end. I'm tempted to see if Ian's going to come back. He's back here now. So Ian will be coming back into the stream in 1, 2, 3, and Ian is back.
Yay! At what point did I die there? I don't know what happened. What was I saying?
You were basically explaining. You moved across the side. You were. Oh, my mind hath gone blank.
I was complaining about the youth,
and we were whinging on. As I said, the show is whinging on.
Yeah. Yes, I'm just whining. Yeah,
whining
so
on, not whinging.
Basically, nowadays the public have a direct route to the performer, so you don't go through the gatekeeper. So there's no quality control, and there's no financial control either. It used to be that.
Ian, I'm going to pick you up here. You went to a bar when you were a young man and you made your own gig by your own words. Where was the gatekeeper there?
Precisely. I was a dick.
Okay, so there was a gatekeeper for most people.
Yeah,
and you were kind of a rebel faction.
But I got so much flack for that. And one guy actually, there was a magician in Edinburgh at the time who hated me with a passion. And he was really yelling at me and said, why did you go in and work for tips? You don't ever work for tips and food. There was a magician who was going to get that gig, and you went in and you took a gig from a working magician. And I said, who was the magician? I want to apologize to him. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. No. So I go to Angus and I'm feeling terrible. I said, Angus, this guy told me there was somebody else. No, bullshit. There was never another magician. He was just trying to mess with me. But I do, as I said, I do less, fewer.
But we were saying the reason you do fewer now is because there's an influx of kids from YouTube. Which I found quite interesting. The way that's changed the dynamics slightly.
Yes, but it's more. Again, I sound like I'm complaining, and it wasn't the fact that they learned off YouTube. It was the fact that they went out after 6 months and they didn't have the skills. And so they go out and they do a gig for 50 quid or 100 quid and they're not good. And then the booker is like, oh, what's happened here? And then the booker's never going to book a magician again. Or if somebody Googles magician and they get the first 10 people, they are going to book on price. They're not going to care that you have 20 years experience over this guy. You're going to care that you're 300 quid more expensive. So anyway, that sounds like a massive whinge, and I don't mean to be a massive whinger more than usual.
It's fine, mate. It's okay. Sometimes we have to complain about something. Sometimes we have to find a time to whine on. Ian, we're reaching the last 9 minutes now. So in these last 9 minutes, is there anything you want to tell everybody?
Be nice without an agenda. That's it. That's right now in my old age. My whole way of life is don't be a dick. And I think now I'm trying to build not a reputation, but to be known to be the kind person. I'll help people if they can. And I firmly believe in paying it forward, doing things to help people without a motive, without necessarily any benefit to myself. And that sounds really patronizing, I know, but that's where I am.
No, it doesn't. Altruism is a laudable goal to have.
I'm lucky to be in a position now where I can be altruistic. We don't have to stop at 10, by the way. I would say if you want to keep talking, if anybody else wants to listen, we've got about 30% into where we got.
Well, you're welcome to keep talking on if you want to chat some more. By all means, I've got until probably about 10:30 tonight, and then I've got to go and meet a lovely human being.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do that. Well, let's talk. I mean, I'm looking at where do we get to? We got to about 2012.
Yeah.
I'm at the stage now where I enjoy doing street shows again. I stopped for several reasons. I stopped doing indoor shows in the Fringe and just concentrate on the street, which is so much less stressful. I love the draw. I love the fact that at 10 o'clock in the morning every day, 80 people get together and just bullshit for an hour. And I love again, it's kind of like what I was saying to you earlier about, for those of you that don't know, I was chatting to Matt and I was explaining the boarding school and how people have asked me to explain boarding school to them. And I say it's like Vietnam, not because of the atrocities and the misery, but because if you weren't there, you'll never understand it. And I think it's very similar to the busking community. Now, we have some dickheads. We had a little bust up last year which wasn't nice. We have people that don't get on, but for the most part, August for me is my favorite time of year because for 3 weeks of the year, my friends have a pulse. You know, I have 80 people that come to town and they hang out and we talk and we joke and we make fun, and it's lovely. And I love that community of buskers, which doesn't really exist within magic in the same way. And it certainly doesn't exist in any other industry.
Blackpool is not the equivalent.
Blackpool, have you ever been to Blackpool Convention?
No, I do a few tricks, but I'm not really a magician.
Oh no, Blackpool, for those of you that don't know, is the largest magic convention in the world, and it happens on usually the third weekend of February in Blackpool. We take over the Winter Gardens. There's like 3,000 magicians there, and the Egos have their own convention in Preston. It is the most backstabby, cliquey, one-upmanship debacle for 4 days. Blackpool in winter reminds me, there's a song by Chris de Burgh that I like called Fatal Hesitation, and there's a line in that song that reminds me of Blackpool, and it goes, "The cafes are all deserted, the streets are wet again. There's nothing quite like an out-of-season holiday town in the rain." And that just sums up Blackpool in February. But the same the camaraderie. Here's the thing.
I mean, I'll say this, you do have the backstabby thing in Edinburgh. You do have a little bit of that, but there is camaraderie. There's
a camaraderie, because you have, even back in 93, 94, when I was greener than a green person, there were people who were genuinely nice to me. Sam and Andy were genuinely nice to me. Dave Pickens and his partner, whose name I cannot remember, they were nice to me. They stole my audiences, but they were nice.
Was there something there of it was in the game? It was all part of the game. Once you're in the show, that was the game there, and then outside of that, they were caring.
Yeah, and people were. I mean, I remember doing a spot in the cabaret bar at the Fringe Club. It was known as the Bear Pit, one of the early ones. I think it may have been the first one. And the amazing Dave.
Oh, was the Bear Pit the one with the balcony around it? Where people had thrown stuff at you? Yes. I
did 19 spots there over the years and stormed all but one. Wow. I love that room.
Oh, but congratulations.
The first one was the great Dave. You know Dave from Australia? I can't remember.
Yes, he will be on the show at some point soon.
There Evans. We go. Dave Evans. Dave is there, and Rex Boyd is there, and somebody else are sitting in the front row at the front table watching, and I'm just like, oh my god, I'm doing this in front of the 3 best street performers. Ah. And they came up afterwards, and Dave was like, that was great. And that camaraderie, that feeling of I am busker. Yeah. And
we are busker.
We are buskers, you know, and it's people will look out for each other for the most part. You know, if somebody, let's say you're in the street and some scally runs in and grabs your hat or your money box, your thing, every busker is going to chase that guy down, because
even people you don't get along with, if you see them, but they're down, they're falling to bits. As a busker, you tend to try and pick them up.
Yeah,
you're family, isn't you?
It's and as I said before, I mean, I am, as I said, the least typical street performer. I'm a middle class 52-year-old privately educated white guy. Why am I on the street? But what I love is that I can talk to these people who I see for 3 weeks of the year, who are some of my best friends. And I think the community, again, I've been in many different groups. Skydivers are a bit like that. There is a camaraderie among skydivers. But I think the busking community is one of the strongest. It's not the easiest to get into, as I discovered in '93.
About adrenaline and threat and that kind of thing, risk, because it's not life and death when you walk out and busk, but there is a huge element of emotional risk. Every time someone puts themselves out there, they're taking a big risk, similar possibly to the way someone jumps out of a plane. They're taking that risk.
I think I think the way that I see it now in my old age is I look at anyone who will do a street show, and the young kids that are coming up now that are hanging out, Jan and Casper and Scotty. I mean, Super Scott I've known since he was 12 years old, who would come out.
Well, Super Scott's young, but he doesn't really have. He's not young, is he? Because he's been around since he was 8 years old. He's been
12. Yeah, I met when he was 12.
12 years old,
or around about then.
Did he do a show when he was 12 years old, escaping from a 5-year-old jumper? I heard, or something like this. Yeah. And
I don't remember that. I just remember, there was this kid, but he went out and he did it. And I think I have enormous respect for anybody who will go out and build an edge. Anybody who can actually, because it is, everybody says, oh, the most stressful thing is public speaking. try public speaking in the middle of the road when nobody's there, and getting them to stay and getting them to want to pay you. I think it is an enormous skill, and that is why I respect anybody who does it. Actually, can I just say one thing? Just go. Let's rewind back a couple of hours, because I want to tell you this story. So, 1993, on my first street show, I made a child vanish on the mound. Right, I said that, and
Interpol has been looking into it ever since.
Interpol have gone, wait, what? Fuck? So here's what I did. I had do you remember back in the 80s and 90s, the Palestinian scarves were all the rage, the black and white scarves. They're about a meter and a half.
So I probably don't, but other people may.
For God's sake, I feel old. Anyway, so a typical Arabic scarf. It's about a meter and a half, 4 or 5 feet square, black and white. So I had one of these, and I got some magician's rope, and I tied a piece of magician's rope to the 2 corners, in the top corners. So I had a loop that went down to the bottom. And the idea was that I would get a kid, and I would stand him in front of me, and I would put this cloth in front of him, and then stage whisper, hide behind my legs. Kind of like what Hazel does in her show, that kind of thing, right? But not as good as Hazel.
Tony Livingspace also is another guy who does this gag.
Okay, right. So this is Tony was probably doing it before me, but this is 1992.
I don't know if he was. I think Tony in '92 was doing his juggling show. So I don't know the provenance of that. Don't I
will claim this bit because it's shit. So what I would do is I'd put the cloth in and say, stand behind me, and this little kid would go and crouch down behind my legs, and then I would lift up. Ta-da! He's gone. Now, obviously, I'm built like a racing snake, so you can see he's there. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible joke. I didn't have the case that Hazel has, or I don't know what Tony does, but whatever. So I then say, I will now bring him back. And of course, I put the cloth down, he comes in, and I produce the kid. And I'm like, I thought this was genius. Then, here's where it gets funky. Because I would cover him again, and I would I'd whisper to the kid, stand on the loop of rope. So I've got the rope, and stand on the loop of rope, and hold on, right? So he's there. And then I would lift up the cloth, and he was gone, because he was behind the thing. Now, several things are wrong with this. One, small children find it very hard to balance on a rope, so he was swinging all over the shop. 2, I was only holding the rope with a little bit of magician's rope in my hand as I was curling. And 3, small children are heavy. And I'm trying to nonchalantly curl a 5-stone child to lift up as if I'm just lifting a scarf. And it was... I think I did that 3 times, and then I threw it away because it was awful. But that was my 27p show.
Well, it was a fun idea.
If I did it now with my knowledge, I could probably do it better. But Hazel does it better, and Tony, so it's not mine anymore.
Oh, do you feel like once you've seen someone do something and you don't believe you could bring something new, do you feel like there's no point in doing it? Is that a feeling you have?
It is. Because I don't want to be. This is something I teach in my magic classes as well. I don't want to be Derek generic. This is one of the reasons I didn't do cups and balls for so long. I don't want to be the guy who. And I hate to say this because a lot of my buddies do it. I don't want to do 3 fire torches on a 5-foot unicycle. Mainly because I hate tall unicycles. Oh my God. I can ride a small unicycle. Sally Kipton in Sydney, in Circular Quay, had a 5-foot giraffe. And I got on that 5-foot giraffe on one side of Circular Quay, and I rode it to the other side, which was maybe 30 feet on a good day. and I got off, and I will never get on a giraffe again because it scared the living crap out of me.
You're a skydiver.
I know.
You jump out of planes.
There's a massive difference between 16,500 feet and 5 feet. Believe me. I got across. I didn't, I started. I got across. I got dismounted. I did not fall off. I did not lose balance. I will not do it again. Because it's just, and then Quinn falls off and brains himself, which didn't help my confidence any.
Well, I tell you what, doing this research, I found out that people falling from height and attaining head injuries is not uncommon in our field. I know at least 5 people now who have brain injuries from falling by doing this kind of 40 years of research. And 5 in 40 years isn't that many. But that's 5 incredible performers that now spend the rest of their lives dealing with consequences of those falls.
Yeah, 5 too many. It's so I didn't want to do that. But I think that I don't want to be the guy who does the show that everybody else does. And so
why?
I don't.
I mean, this is a difficult question, but why do you not want to be? It's difficult because I feel the same thing. But I'm just trying to dig out the feeling behind it. Why do you not want to be the person who does everyone else's show?
It comes from magic.
Or does someone else's show? Yeah, generic Eric.
Yeah, generic. It comes from magic as well, because people who do the same. There's a lot of people that do the same material in magic. And I mean, I don't know if you can believe this, but I remember being a gig once and I said, could you pick a card? And the guy says, I've seen this one, which is absolutely preposterous because there are thousands of card tricks. So, but that's the feeling. And if you do something, and on the street, I mean, I felt upset when Dan Druff took my line in Sydney in 93. I was furious with him because that was mine. And he actually said to me, the street is all about taking other people's lines. And that was the fight we had. So I just don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be someone who, let's say I go out wearing a kilt and I strip off my kilt down to my underwear. I am never going to do that better than Pete. And the only reason I'm doing it is because I've seen Pete do it and it was good. So I won't have done any of the work to get that routine. I will not have done any of the work to develop the routine. I will have just taken it. And that's not me. And to be honest, when it's happened to me, when somebody has taken my line, I felt like I had been thieved. I felt like somebody had actually taken something that I had worked on and developed and written and and they had done nothing. They just saw me, saw the laugh, took it.
Is it just the emotional slight and the lack of respect, or is there a economic career feeling for this as well?
I think there is there's the economy. I mean,
you know what I mean by saying?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. I don't. Yeah. I'm just trying to formulate my response in a way that doesn't sound utterly shite. If you are in Edinburgh and you're a punter and you go up to the mound, you go to the high street to watch some shows. And let's say you're a camper that sits on the pyramid of Mound 1, and you've got a good seat, 3 rows up in the pyramid. You're going to stay there for a few shows. And 3 people come out and they do the same show with the same lines. Are you going to pay the third guy the same as you paid the first guy? Or are you going to realize that, well, you can buy this in a book? So
is there something about the breaking of the suspension of disbelief in that? Because they believe that you are the character you portray if you can successfully suspend their disbelief. If they see that 2 or 3 times, that collapses, surely.
I don't think it's a suspension of disbelief for the character. I think people believe I like to think that people believe that you are doing a show that they're not going to see anywhere else. And
it's you. It's sincere and genuine to the individual they're watching.
And then when suddenly they see the same line done by somebody else, I mean, I'll give you an example of this in a way that actually works. In your early days of the 90s, I did Rocky Raccoon. You know Rocky Raccoon? It's a puppet. I've got two up there, but my headphones won't get there. And
is it the one that moves around like this?
No, hang on, wait.
Is it one the string and it moves around you? So this is where I dance around to entertain.
It's this guy.
Oh, what a little guy.
So this is Rocky Raccoon. Very, very popular in the 90s because David Williamson, who is one of my magical heroes, published a routine in a DVD. And so I did this routine in fringe shows, on the street, in comedy clubs, all over. And I had people emailing me and phoning me that somebody had stolen my raccoon routine. And he hadn't. He just bought the same DVD that I did. It was a published routine. But because these people had seen me do it so much in Edinburgh, when they saw this other guy do it, they thought he'd nicked it from me. And so their reaction to him was negative, which was unfortunate for him. And I had to explain to them that actually, no, he's done nothing wrong. You should not have been negative to him. And that's with published material. But I think when it comes to bits, when you think that that a street show is a 35-minute build-up to a 3-minute trick most of the time, that 35 minutes is important. And I don't think that somebody should see something and then do it. I find I'm not comfortable with people watching a trick or watching a routine or watching a bit and then going, hey, I can do that, and then doing it because you didn't come up with it. So anyway, that was a very ranty bit rant.
Yeah. No, it's fine. And I find it quite interesting because, I mean, obviously the biggest case we can bring up here is the cups and balls. I've got to undo this top button now. We're in for 2 hours. I can undo the top button. The most common example is the Gazzo cups and balls routine. And I think this is a thing that's more pervasive because of the style of teaching in magic than it is in circus or anything else. That kids buy a trick and the magician who sells the trick sells it kind of with a routine. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm aware, I mean, when I was a kid and I began busking, I did watch the Gazzo DVD and I lifted every single line from it and used them until I understood what they were and then moved on to something else. Mm-hmm. And I know that watching that DVD, Gazzo says, go out and make your own stuff. This is a guide so you can understand it. Go out and make your own thing, which nobody bloody did. You know, when not many people did. You did, a few other people did. There's a guy in London called Paul. I'm trying to remember his last name now, his real last name. Magic Paul is what we call him. I mean, he's got a very original cups and balls routine. Same as Nick Nicholas.
Yeah.
But they're rare. Most people just take that. And it seems to me that magic, more than any other form of performance, you buy a kit which includes the performance style and character and everything built into it. So it's so interesting that you've come out of that with the opposite thing. You've come out of that saying, no, you must do your own thing.
There's a very long conversation within magic on this very subject that comes down to 3 or 4 different sides. A guy called Pop Hayden, who started off in the street, he says that if you buy a routine, don't change the routine, because the guy that sold it has spent 10, 20 years trying out everything you're about to try out, and it won't be as good as him because he's done it. He wrote an essay called Against Originality in Magic. So that's one side. Then the other side, there's a massive, huge argument against learning from a book and learning from a video. Because with a video, people tended to mimic the presentation of the performer. So you have a lot of David Williamson clones. You have a lot of Darwin Ortiz clones. You have a lot of Darryl clones, of people that have exactly the same intonation. We were talking about this earlier. Exactly the same mannerisms, the same body language. And you have a bunch of clones, a bunch of Derek generics. Interestingly, one of you might not know this, the first book in the English language to describe magic tricks was called Discovery of Witchcraft. And it was written in 1584. It's published in 1584 by a guy called Reginald Scott. I have a copy on the shelf there, but not a first edition. And in it is a description, because there's magic tricks in it, of how to make what's called a blow book, which you know is the magic coloring book. You know the magic coloring book where you flick through the blank pages and then oh yeah, okay. It's a book and you flick through it and all the pages are blank, and you flick through it and all the pages are line drawings, and you flick through it, all the pages are colored. And it's a classic prop that every magician has used. And it's described in 1584 of how to make this. It's 450 years old. But
and I assume it's like a gaff deck kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's a
thing, I think. Yeah, it's pages. But the best thing about it is right next to the description, Scott says, this trick is much easier to show than to describe, which proves to me that the whole video against written learning is 500 years old. So you have this within magic. You've got this idea that you don't want to do routines straight out of the box. You don't want to use the patter or the presentation that's given, because you will then be a Derek generic. I'm going to sneeze. Hang on. Excuse me. So yeah. So that in a very roundabout way is why I don't want to do vanishing children on the street, because other people do it better.
That's fair enough. I mean, I still find it pretty fascinating, this idea of video teaching and book teaching. I mean, I'd like to touch on that a bit more still, is that when people learn from a book, when they're looking at the book, they can learn the mechanism of the performance. But as you said, they can't learn the intonation. They don't. And my argument against potentially the guy you mentioned earlier who brought the essay against originality is that performer has spent 10 years learning how to make that trick work for them.
I've lost you, but if you're not still talking, what Witt talks about is less the presentation, but the mechanics. He says you shouldn't try to alter the actual method, the flow of the routine, but you should absolutely put your own presentation on it. So magic is there are similarities between magic in the theater and magic in the street, but I do believe fully that it's something that needs to be it just needs to be looked at with clear eyes. Is he back? He's on. He's coming back now. We'll just sort of twiddle thumbs for a wee bit. Is he back? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and no. So, and yeah, there he is. He's back. I was just spraffing on about books. So here's the thing about learning from a book. Learning from a book is a much more active process as opposed to a passive learning process. If you watch a video, you're just watching. If you're reading from a book, you have to actively read through. The biggest problem with this, and I say this as a teacher with 3.5 official teaching qualifications and nearly 40 years of teaching experience, is that very few people can write technical prose. Very
What do you
few
mean by
people.
technical pros?
Teaching how to do magic, how to
being able to mechanically describe it.
Yes, yeah. Now this is something at which I am particularly good for a number of reasons, but a lot of magic books, certainly the ones written in the 50s and the 60s and the 40s, these people didn't know anything about teaching. They're just describing something. They probably never had a lesson plan. They never had anything. They're just basically saying, put your finger here, do this, do that. Boom. And it's impossible to learn like that, which is why you have a whole generation or 2 or 3 generations of magicians who do the same sleight differently, because they all have their own interpretation of the text. And that's not necessarily a good thing. I wrote a couple of ebooks that had text and video embedded, which I think is probably the best way to teach, because I was able to write a technical thing and then show how it's supposed to look. But yeah, I mean, book learning doesn't, I think I've got a copy of Beyond the Cascade somewhere here for juggling, but yeah.
So I imagine that's technical juggling book. I'm just interested in this thing that you said, it's not always best to have people look and interpret it in their own way. But yet you talk about the fact that everyone should be individual. Like, I feel there's points in conflict there.
No, because it's not good when people are interpreting technical instruction. So can you drive a car? Yeah, Matt, can you drive a car?
So, no, sorry, I don't.
Okay, so you're perfect, right? So if I say if you get to see somebody, here's a car, and in order to drive it, you have to lift the clutch up, press the accelerator down, have a nice day. You're going to stall the car 9 times out of 10.
I'm going to the first wall I see.
Yeah, because there is a massive difference within magic between showing how something is done and showing how to do something. Because the first one is a kind of a lecture thing where you basically, here's the information, do with it what you will, assuming that the student has the background knowledge, the scope of knowledge, to be able to interpret that information. If you show how to do something, this is teaching. This is the difference between school and university. And teaching will show you where your hands go, how to move, and how things are going. I noticed that Bobo Roberts there said books are taught a lot about the business. Yes, you can learn an awful lot about books. I'm not saying I have, wrong way. I have all of those and bunches over there. Yes, books are great. I love books. However, the books have to be written well, and the student has to be at the correct level for that book, because otherwise you get frustration.
But when you say this thing, right, that you say that there's a way to learn, if a student sits and reads a book and learns the wrong way to do something, but manages to achieve the effect anyway, isn't that good?
Yes, but it's also extremely rare.
Okay.
It's really
rare. I say, because I don't do any technical magic, so I really don't know about this.
Let's talk about juggling, right? Let's say you are going to learn a 5-ball cascade. Okay?
Yes.
Now, the typical route for learning 5-ball, the way that I learn it, is you learn with 3 and you flash 3. So you do 55500, 55500, 55500. Okay, you do that. You get a consistent 5 throw when you're throwing. Okay. Then you put in a 4th. So you do 55550, 55550, 55550, which is how I do 4, because I can't do 4 with a fountain. Then you add in 5 and you do the 5, right? That is
55555.
the correct way to learn, or my preferred way to learn 5 balls. Now, if I go up to somebody who can do a 3-ball cascade, give them 2 more balls and say juggle 5, there is if they're Anthony Gatto's clone, they might go boom, 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 and do it. But 9 times out of 10, they go boom, blah, 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 blah.
Well, I'll be honest here and say this. I only juggle 4 balls because I never got to the 5 ball. I never got over the 5-ball barrier.
Okay.
Because of exactly what you're saying. that I sat there, and I don't school myself in anything because I'm a petulant wanker, and so I will just sit and try and learn it. And 5 balls was such a mystical, different planet to what I was doing with 4 balls. I never ever got there.
I can't juggle 4.
I think maybe that's some validity. Well, but you understand how to get to 5 better than I do.
No, I did. I went to 3 and I went to 5, and then I went back to 4. And when I do 4, I don't like doing 2 in each hand. I do a 5-ball pattern with a space. Is how I do 4.
Okay, because I do fountain, because I could logically get 2 balls in one hand, do that.
Yeah.
2 balls in one hand, do that, and then you put them together, and I could logically get to there.
Yeah.
But I never felt like I could logically get to 5 balls. It seemed like fucking black magic. It seemed like something, as I said, interstellar on a different planet.
But had somebody come up to you and said, start with 3, do 3, flash 3, continue flashing 3, make sure you get a constant 5 height. If you do that, then you'll be able to juggle 5. I guarantee it. And that is the difference between good instruction and bad instruction, which is being misinterpreted by somebody who wasn't ready for it. That's the difference. So, that is why good instruction is so important.
Ian, it's a really nice note. We have 3 minutes left. I'd love to chat with you more. We can chat again, by all means, in the future. There's always more time to whine on.
Always.
For now, in our last 3 minutes, is there any last small phrases you want to give to the lovely people that have been watching you for 2.5 hours now?
I thank you for putting up with watching me spraff on about my disastrous career for 2.5 hours. It's been a lot of fun. I can talk for hours. I can talk for Scotland. I apologise for the tangents on which I go, but I've had a great time.
No,
be nice. If you are a street person, you know what I'm talking about. You're part of the community. If you're not a street person, you're probably looking at what we've been saying and go, what on earth are they talking about? But I hope that we've given you an idea of what we're about. And I hope that soon I'll be able to see you guys again, and we'll be able to hang out by the statue at 10 o'clock behind St. Giles and just shoot the shit for an hour.
I think we both long for that moment in the morning where we all gather together and feel our kinship as we're at the bingo of who's going to earn money that day.
It's fun, but no, I've had a blast, and thank you everybody for watching. And I'm going to say, if you can, please chuck a couple of pennies to Matt to keep this thing going, because I honestly think this project is going to be the most important resource for the street that we've got. We need to keep all this knowledge because there's a bunch of us that are getting old, and I think there's going to be a lot of street knowledge that's going to be kept from this. So yeah, this has been fantastic. Cool.
Well, I will agree with that, and I'll say now is that I love the Whining on resource that we're creating, because of the fact that when most street performers die, their knowledge dies with them. And because of exceptionalism, what commonly happens is people move forward and out of the street into a very big level. Because of exceptionalism, they don't tend to go, the reason you should come and see me in my venue is because of all these wonderful people I learned from. No, they go, I'm exceptional.
Yeah.
Because that's the way the industry demands you behave.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to gather these oral histories of people, I think is really valuable. I mean, for me personally, I said it to Ian earlier on, this is the best crash course I could ever have in quarantine. I'm talking to my heroes, And
a gobshite from Scotland.
If you want to look at the project more and you've only just dropped in, go search on Facebook for Whining On with Public Performers. Please like and follow the Incorrigible Rogue, my page. If you can, put in the Patreon to help fund the channel. It'd be amazing, because God knows this is time consuming and expensive. If you want to put a £1 PayPal drop in, like dropping in a hat, please do. Otherwise, I'm going to say this. Ian, thank you for your time. You've been such a joy to talk to, buddy.
It's been lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Everyone, now we're going to leave. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye,
Bye-bye.
goodbye, goodbye. No idea when this ends. It's the internet. Goodbye.